Hello, everyone. Haslit sa ahel, tuwag walapu daishad, desayayaya, Karina Emmerich Zitsat, talal chad poyalap. Good day, everyone. Hello to all of my relatives. My name is Karina Emmerich. My pronouns are she, her. I am originally from the Coast Salish Territory Puyallup tribe on my father's side, and I am currently a guest on Lenape Hoking, also known as Brooklyn, New York. Welcome to week 2 of the Summit series. I am the owner and designer of Emmy, an ethical and sustainable slow fashion clothing line. I am also a member of the Indigenous Kinship Collective, which is a direct action group that honors ourselves and our relatives through art, activism, education, and representation. And I am on the board of directors for the Slow Factory and will be filling in today for Celine Simon. So all of my work is actively centered around dismantling systems of oppression and white supremacy and challenging colonial ways of thinking. And I'd like to welcome everyone to our discussion today on activism and fashion. As artists and designers, we are all storytellers. We are given a platform to tell a story, share a feeling, and make a statement. And right now, it's an extremely pivotal time as we're actively working to transform the world we live in to become a more just and equitable place for future generations. The COVID-19 crisis has simply aided in lifting the veil of the global systemic problems of racism, environmental racism, income inequality, access to clean water, inequitable access to healthcare, police brutality, and so much more. So before we jump in, I want to go ahead and have everybody introduce themselves, introduce your work, and then just give a quick note about how you've been spending your quarantine. Camila, why don't you go ahead?
Hi, everybody. I'm really excited to have this discussion. I feel like we're so apart, and spaces like this are super important. And I am Colombian, raised in Spain, and I was born in Mexico. And now I live in New York City, where I feel everyone I know has seven nationalities like me. And it's been a beautiful time right now to really consider what we are really doing with our work. And I'm really thinking through everything I do and with my work. I'm a photographer, a fashion photographer, and portrait photographer. And I've recently, I think that we will come to that later, have been putting out there images that I feel are really important right now. And I've learned new ways of doing it without putting myself in the center of the discussion and giving other voices a platform through my vision. And yeah, I'm really excited to talk about all of this with you.
Awesome, welcome. Sam, why don't you go ahead and go next?
Hi, everyone. My name is Sam Romero. I am the co-founder and CMO of Selva Negra, and we are a Latina-owned women's wear brand based here in LA. I'm Dominican and was raised in Miami, Florida. So I also moved to New York for college and stayed there for 7 years. And then I moved over to Chicago, then landed in LA. I'm really, really excited to be having this conversation with you guys, and I can't wait to dive into it. And in terms of spending time in quarantine, I started therapy right before quarantine, and I think that has been the most amazing gift I've ever given to myself. And I think that it's been such a reflective time by nature for all of us, and to be doing this like deep dive into not only what's happening and processing the world around us, but to do that work in myself has been incredible. So yeah.
Kristen, the other half of Selva Negra, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kristen Gonzalez. I'm the creative director and co-founder / CEO of Selva Negra. I was born in California and moved around a lot, but I ended up in New York for 6 years and then came back to California. I am Mexican American and Filipino American, very proud to be. And I've been spending quarantine hanging out with my cats, baking, gardening, like just kind of deep diving into all of the hobbies and, finding new ways and things to do during this time that are really healing for me. But I'm also extremely excited to talk with everybody. It's a really amazing cast that we have. So ready to get through it.
Awesome. Thank you. And Jamae, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Jamae Jackson. I am a Washington, D.C. born girl, but I call Brooklyn my home now. I am the founder and editor-in-chief of The Blonde Misfit. It is a digital brand focused on the positive upliftment of Black and Brown voices in the fashion and beauty industry. And I'm just really excited to be here with you all today. I wish I could say quarantine has just been me eating lots of donuts and watching my Netflix series, which I have. I've been doing all that. But I've also been really busy with The Blonde Misfit. We launched a newsletter. We've introduced new guests on our podcast. And we've also introduced the Misfit Fund, which is our initiative to provide grants to Black and Latinx-owned fashion and beauty brands. And so it's very on par with our discussion today around activism, and I know we'll get into it a little bit later. So yeah, that's been my quarantine.
Awesome. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I also have been spending my quarantine just solely focusing on mask making. So I feel like that this has definitely not been a break for me. And a lot of us who, care about things have definitely had to kick into high gear. So I appreciate you all taking the time today as we're all very busy. So I'm going to just go ahead and jump in, and you guys can just jump in whenever. But I want to start off by just asking you individually, how and what role does activism play in your work?
I'm gonna go first, maybe. I think I had never had the guts really to use the word activism. I feel like it's a really big word, and to really own that. I'm really honored to be in this discussion, because you always feel like you're trying to do something, and the fact that that is considered activism makes me really proud. But what I've realized is that in the times we're living, and always, but especially the times we're living, is really not an option to put work out there that isn't conscious of its impact. I think no one should not be thinking about how whatever it is that they're producing is affecting the world. And so I think that is something that is always on my mind. The huge responsibility of image making is because images can travel really far away from me, because I just produce them, put them in the world, and I don't know who's going to see them. And I always hope people see themselves in them, and I always hope people see people in those positions they've never seen before, and not only as an exceptional thing, but that it normalizes it. So that really obsessed with. It's not an obsession, it's my life is about that. I don't know how you guys feel.
I'll jump in here. I think that's actually kind of a really good point. Activism, I think, has always had a very strong word or strong meaning towards it. And the way that we, as a women's fashion brand, we always knew that we wanted to make sure that what we were producing was the right way to do it, which was making sure that we were paying everybody what they really deserved, making sure that the products are coming from a sustainable standpoint. So making sure that the fabrics are, more eco-friendly, and I think that in itself, having the ethical fashion part of it has really kind of been our activism in the business. But at the same time, we always are trying to find new ways. So for example, with the new president saying all these things about Mexican people, we wanted to make sure that, the stories were heard of immigrants, and making sure that people understand, they are human, this is a human rights issue. So we created this, well, Sam designed a sweater and we started selling it, and partial proceeds were going towards this organization that is, sorry, I'm like blanking on the name right now. I don't know why. This organization that is helping immigrants, not undocumented immigrants, have resources and kind of have an easier time coming in and helping them figure out how to get their documents in order. So proceeds are going towards that. So that's kind of how we are laying out our activism and really trying to, change the conversation and really start a conversation, especially in fashion, which is a very, it's a very tough type of industry because there are so many issues with it. But yeah, Sam, United We Dream. Yes, they're an amazing organization and you guys should all follow them. But they're the ones in Washington, helping to fight to keep DACA and to help a lot of DACA recipients maintain their status, and yeah, so it's been great.
I'll chime in. I come from a hard-hitting background, a hard-hitting like news background rather, and so I've always known about activism, and then obviously being in DC, there's a lot of politics that are involved in legislation. And so I've always had to learn how to both articulate your voice, but then also articulate the voice of your employer or your party, and being able to convey that in a way that's educational, but that it's also informative. Well, in news, it's educational and it's informative, but it doesn't necessarily cover everything that's happening in culture with the streets. And for me, as a Black woman, as a woman of color, it was very important for me to continue that narrative, which is why I started my own media brand. But with activism, I agree with what everyone else has said. It's a big word that carries a lot of weight behind it. You don't think of yourself as an activism because you compare yourself to all these other people in the history books, and you're like, but what am I doing compared to them? And to me, I think everyone is their own activist, right? And especially in today's time where we are pulling back the layers, both corporately as well as culturally, where we're seeing so many conversations happening, whether it's a public health crisis or it's inequality, systemic inequities that plague people of color inside and outside of a boardroom. And I just think that we're just having this reawakening. It's like almost a reckoning of sorts, where people are not only confronting and speaking up, but they're also realizing their own power. And so for me, it's really been a journey. I tell people all the time, as a Black woman, my simple existence is revolutionary. It is political. I take up space in the world and I'm unapologetic about that. And I teach other people to do the same. So activism and fashion really, some people don't think activism and fashion go together because they're like, how can you be an activist when it's just clothes on your body or it's just makeup in your bag? But it's about so much more than that. As long as there are systemic practices that disenfranchise people, whether it's women, whether it's Black models, whether it's natural hairstyles, it's texture, it's body size, there is still work to be done. And that is where activism lies. And so I think that's really where it is at right now. And I think that we're just going to continue to see this reckoning even post-COVID.
Yes, thank you so much. Sam, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I feel like I think something that we have really, worked on, and I think that it just comes with us deciding to start a brand, because I don't think that we really intended to start a brand when we did. It kind of happened by accident. But I think what's most important and the biggest takeaway that I think we're seeing the importance of is that we are seeing ourselves in fashion in a way that we're giving other people a way to see themselves in fashion that we didn't necessarily have growing up. And I think that in and of itself is activism in the work that we're doing. So outside of everything Kristen said, I think it's just the representation bit for Latinas to see themselves, Latino kids, BIPOC kids to see themselves in fashion, I think is huge for me, because I didn't think I could do fashion. I didn't think that I could make a career and live off of this work. So I hope that that's also considered activism in all the work that we do. It's important for us to be standing where we're standing. Yeah.
Yes, I agree so much. I think there's definitely a lot of systemic problems when just our representation in these areas is considered activism. So I think that there's a lot of equal parts of learning and unlearning that needs to happen within this industry. And like a lot of Indigenous people say, our existence is the resistance. So I just want to also touch on, we talked a little bit about sustainability, and I deal with a lot of greenwashing, seeing a lot of greenwashing tactics. But now during this time, I think we're moving into this whole new era of what is called woke washing. So how do you view the role of activists in the fashion industry? And what do you think is the level of like authenticity behind that?
I can chime in here for a bit. I think what's happening now, which is really really eye-opening for a lot of people, but I also think a lot of people have really seen this before. But it is holding companies accountable. That's, at the end of the day, that's exactly what companies should be doing, what they're saying. So I think what consumers and everybody should really want is ensuring that the companies, or wherever they're spending their dollars, these practices are going into place. There are these large companies that are promoting that they have a really diverse team, or that they have recycled this and recycled that, but they're at the same time not treating everybody fairly. They're underpaying their Latino women, they're underpaying their Black women, so like it's a really great time, I think, for people, for anybody who's purchasing, to really dive deep into what exactly they're buying, and these things that are these companies that are claiming that they are this and this and this, however they're not actually getting into that. So I think it's really important, and I really applaud all of the consumers that are doing this and really calling upon change with these large companies and small businesses.
If I can just add on to Kristen's point, I think at the end of the day, what companies need to be doing is not only being authentic, because I think consumers can tell when companies are being authentic or not, but they need to show us receipts. Like, I think companies should be transparent about where their dollars are going, about whether or not they're actually giving to the initiatives that they're saying they're giving to. I think it's important for people to come to a website and see those receipts, and not have to I'm going to email info at blah, blah, blah. I think it's important for those things to be front and center as well. So.
I'll say that with woke washing, I feel like it's in the same umbrella as cancel culture, right? And these new terms that people are using to sort of elicit a response that they are trying to either give or that they want. I think that on the flip side to what has already been said, we are also seeing a lot of pandering. And I just am focused on making sure that this is for the long haul. It's really amazing to me when I see media outlets now covering Black owned and Latin owned and by POC owned brands. But I want it to be more than it's just a fleeting moment. I want it to be more than when we have just protests, or more when people raise, hell up on social media. I want this to be infiltrated in our coverage, in our media, how we cover journalism, how we cover arts, how we cover fashion designers. And that does start with an internal change. It does start with a sweep internally and allowing your people to grow. You know, if you feel like your glass ceiling is here, but then your white counterpart has a far higher glass ceiling, well, you're not going to come to work encouraged. You're not going to come to work thinking that you can put your best foot forward because you don't think that there's anywhere for you to go. And that also starts with companies being held accountable for their hiring practices, for their recruiters, for ensuring that people of color all across the board have space to speak up and to be able to vocalize themselves, that they're not, what is it called? Gaslighting, that they're not being gaslit into thinking that they're crazy for feeling the way that they feel, and that companies provide resources for these people to grow and to learn and to thrive. Because I have yet to see a single brand under the sun, a fashion business, a business, whatever, that has a diverse group of people at its helm that has not been successful. I have yet to see it. And I don't think we will, because when you offer those diverse perspectives, then that it allows for a bigger and better product. And so, you know, I think I allow people to pander if that's what they want. You know, if you want your influencer who's going to put up the all Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter sign for a flick so she can post it out to her Instagram followers, you know, you can't control and you can't scour the internet. But what I'm concerned about is, what do you do after you take the photo? Where is your money going? Where are your resources going? And how are you using your voice to empower and really evoke change?
Yes, thank you. So Camila, with your work as a photographer, you've also worked with a lot of major brands. And how do you think that your message of activism, inclusion, and representation is going across through their lens?
Well, I was just really, really happy to be around you guys today, because I feel like we all have different perspectives and play a different part on the same industry. And what I think is very powerful about fashion that is taken for granted, but then that's also really exploited in the wrong way, is that fashion is an entity that is meant, that fuels off aspiration. Aspirational is what anything in fashion hopes to be. So on my end, to produce things that people aspire to, but that don't perpetuate systems of oppression of any kind, is how I put my piece on this. So it's come to a point, fortunately, because I've been at it since the beginning. Very rarely, if never, I get a client to ask me to do something I'm not, which I think it's amazing. And I also couldn't do it any other way. Is that even though at the beginning, like a couple of years ago, it was very weird for me to be so determined of who I want to be portraiting in my photos and the reasons, right now I'm realizing that brands, again, can't afford not to be related to people that do that. Of course, I'm not the most successful, or not every brand calls me, but who does is interesting, because they want to feed off of something I've been building for a long time and very slowly, and they want to be a part of my message. So again, you realize that you have this really strong power and say of who you want to be and represent, and that people will follow if you're doing the right thing. And if you're not, then maybe that's not the people you want to be working for anyways. So it's interesting how, as an image maker, that is something so abstract. I think like you guys produce products or a magazine that is something physical. I produce a body of work that expands in time a lot. You realize that you've been doing something constantly without even realizing that, you know, is important, and that defines who you are and what you stand for, and respect that. And I very rarely or never have issues with what they make me do, which is good. That responds to the question.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I agree. And Jamae, what you said really really impacted me as well too. I say if you feel the need to diversify your content, it's probably because there's no diversity in the room where your content's being created. So I think that is the future is looking towards really diversifying these rooms where things are being created. But I wonder, how do you see in the future fashion's role in like what the fashion industry's role will be in breaking down barriers and really fostering communications between multiple cultures and bringing people together so that we can create this more equitable representation of people?
If I may, I think fashion has a huge power because not only does it, like I just said, speak about aspiration, it also has a huge reach because it's an outlet industry. People want to belong to fashion because it's a place where beauty happens, because we like work with beauty in, you know, human beauty, but garment beauty. Beauty is what we do. And then I allow me to get a little bit into these terms. I now know, because of the work I've been doing, that beauty is related to goodness and goodness is related to power. So if we manage to change the very oppressed versions of beauty we've been taught, then by extension, I feel we liberate ideas for more options of power, more options of global understanding of what goodness and human dignity is. So through working with beauty, we are actually working with very powerful concepts that have huge reach, even more so than like fine art portraiture sometimes, because it's something that people in their everyday life want to be a part of. And I think it's super, super powerful and the huge responsibility that we have on our end to do this.
I'll chime in and say that I think fashion also has a huge reach, obviously because of social media. Instagram reaches billions of people, you know, probably every day, and it democratizes fashion. I know that I can go on Instagram on my explore page and I will find the flyest fits. I will find the dopest people to follow, and they may never get a feature in Vogue. They may never get a knock on, Elle or Harper's Bazaar. They may never get a show review, but they're doing the work and they're being active in their community and they're saying something. And it's really important that people understand that there's a difference between just talking and saying something. The two are not synonymous. There's a lot of talking, but are you actually saying something? I think fashion is already having this really big moment right now of activism. You know, you have your Black and Fashion Council, the American Influencers Association, all of these Black and Latinx directories that are springing up. This has been the most, POC centric work I've seen in media in a very long time. And so if they're not at least hiring, they're making sure that their freelancers and contractors are accounting for the kind of content they want to create. But I also think that like activism is with the people, right? Like it doesn't start at the political level. It doesn't start with the president. It doesn't start up high. It starts with people in the streets, pointing something out, feeling something and wanting to stand for something. And I think that with social media, we're getting to see those activists. You know, every single day you look up and you see Black hairstylists or Black designers or a Latinx sketch artist or someone, coming out here and like really showcasing more diversity. That is activism, and that is where it starts. And because what happens is when I see you doing something great, now I feel more empowered for me to walk in my purpose and for me to be able to say something and vocalize something. And then that's a chain reaction, right? And so there's a couple of things at play here. One, you have to walk in your purpose, or you have to be able to answer the call, even if it's scary. But two, also understanding that none of us are in this alone, right? Like we've all done our own individual things in different parts of the industry. And now we're here in this collective unit talking, but we're also here in this collective moment of this reawakening. And so knowing that activism isn't always going to be this big, grandiose gesture with millions of followers and tons of money flowing from, the sky, but it's always going to be impactful, and that you will always be able to find your tribe of other people who support you and who will help you do the work.
Yeah, that is so well said. It really does start at a grassroots level of, when we were starting this, I think that we always wanted to ensure that, like how Sam said, we were showcasing Latinx models and people that really looked like us, and we wanted to make sure that people saw themselves in fashion. So, stemming from that, I think that opening the door, and even though, yes, they're just starting now to realize, certain companies and people saying like, oh, we do need to showcase more diversity, I think there is so much power in that. And I even though, yes, they messed up and they are now starting to do that, but it is about the long run. It's not just a trend right now of like, for the next couple months or the rest of the year, we'll just showcase these, different faces and voices and then, kind of brush it under the rug. I think it is about longevity and how you're going to insert your activism every single day and here forward. So, I think that, yes, fashion is such a great avenue for that because it is so interconnected and it's such a global thing that people are, so passionate about, and having that reach amongst a global audience, seeing colorism in certain countries. And, it has created this really interesting, new wave of people finally caring about things like this. But I think that there is so much positivity in that, even if it stems from something really tragic. And I think that it's really great to see all of these people trying to make that change and asking for it, So I really hope to see this in the future as something that's a long-term thing rather than just a moment. So I'm really looking forward to it, to seeing what happens.
Yeah, and if I could just add to what's already been said, because everything that's been said is absolutely a component, I think, of how to break down barriers. But I also think that like storytelling is such an important role in this. And I think just like thinking about nuance within culture is also what I think will break down barriers, right? Like I think we have sometimes a very surface level idea of what certain cultures are, and we don't get into. I think brands, especially big brands, have a responsibility to kind of show that cultures are not monoliths and that there are so many different types of people within culture. And I think that's a tool that can be used more within our industry as well.
Yeah, so I'm going to jump ahead a little bit because I think we can kind of naturally go into this conversation, but a lot of what I focus on in my work is combating cultural appropriation within the fashion industry, which is a huge issue for Indigenous people and people appropriating our regalia, ceremonial wear. And I could go on forever about why that's super not okay. But what do you guys consider in your work, talking about culture, the difference between cultural appreciation and cultural appropriation? And is that a fine line, or is it something that is like a really definitive line?
I can pop in here. I think this is a really sensitive topic, I think, for everyone. But I think that all of us have really seen it. And even when I was younger, I really did not understand what that was, being a Mexican American and seeing a lot of, the floral design, embroidery, prints, and all these things, and, making money money off of that who are not Mexican American, and also not sharing the stories of Mexican Americans and the struggle and everything that has, you know, the land taken from them and all of that. So I think that there is a fine line in certain aspects, but I think there is now clearly more a drawn line between where you can really appreciate something. I think that if you're appreciating something and using it in a monetary aspect, but not really bringing light to the history of it, where it came from, who was responsible for that, all of it encompassing, then that is complete cultural appropriation. I think that we've also seen it on the runway, a lot of just really terrible cultural appropriation. But I do think that, you know, bringing light to certain cultures and really showing appreciation for that and sharing the stories, that is how you can really bring positivity to it. But, you know, there's just, I think there's just going to continue to be cultural appropriation. But as long as we're, you know, sharing what is right and what's wrong, and, you know, helping people understand why, I think that's really important.
To go off of what Kristen said, I think of cultural appropriation sort of like plagiarism. You know, no one says that you can't add a different source into an essay, but if you take it and claim that it's your own, that's plagiarism. But if you take it and you cite that this is where it originally comes from, and then you add to the discussion, then that's a citation. And that is how I view cultural appropriation versus appreciation. We see it all the time in fashion. We see it all the time with our clothing, with our hair, with our makeup, with all these aesthetics. I tell people all the time that there is this sort of feeling that everyone wants to be Black until it's time to be Black, right? And I know that that pars across the board for most, you know, BIPOC people. We feel that there are parts of our culture that are picked and prodded at, that are commercialized and that are sold back to the general public, but no one ever talks about some of these things that then are used to systemically oppress us. So for instance, I might see a designer use like Kenkalon hair on their models, you know, to send down the runway so that their models look like they have locks. And, you know, they might have an all-white cast. Well, most people might think that's just a hair conversation, that's just a hair aesthetic. But when you think about the Crown Act that currently exists, or that it has not been passed in all 50 states, that employers cannot discriminate you, specifically people with locks. And I think to myself, okay, well, it's cute on Kylie Jenner, but on me, I could not have a job. Like, those are conversations and the bigger implications around cultural appropriation. I do think that there is a way to do it that does bring back awareness to the people or the group that it serves. But that also, again, comes down to making sure that you have a diverse team of people. This can't be a room of all white executives trying to figure out how do we get the POC vote. This requires an awareness that you don't know everything, and then being able to invite those voices and those narratives to the conversation. Also understanding that not all BIPOC people are the same. I can't necessarily speak to the Asian American community or even to the Indigenous community the way someone else would be able to, but I can speak to the Black community. I can speak to the Latinx community, but even there's nuance between, you know, Afro Latinas and regular Latinas. Like, there's so much body to us as people that it's important to just have that diversity in that from the jump. And I think that when we begin to see that, we will stop seeing necessary practices that just make you like look at them and be like, what's going on? Like, why? Who approved this? Because that's what we always ask. Who approved this? And the reality is many of us are not in those rooms, or if we are, we're in the entry level positions. We need to be able to hold these brands accountable so that we can hold higher positions that handle budgets, that hold executive power, and that make decisions so that we can sort of see a change in the industry.
I'm going to jump in and speak about the image making position of cultural appropriation, which is sometimes just so bad. I'm sometimes looking at things like, I can't believe this person who tends to be a white male did this. I can't believe that. Oh my God. And just listen to you talk, and I haven't developed my own thinking about cultural appropriation, but I do know or think, and I really would love to know what you think, guys, is that it comes from a place of profound ignorance when you do that, but it's an ignorance that type of ignorance, which is the worst to me, which is the ignorance that comes with entitlement, which is the ignorance of the people who have a colonialist mind, someone that have that behind those embroiders, let's say whatever thing they're appropriating, there's someone equal as them that deserves, acknowledgement and respect and asking for permission. So when I've seen that happen, it normally comes from a place of someone that feels superior to whoever they're appropriating, because they're not considering what is their opinion on being used for that. They're just being like, yeah, because I have the permission because I'm in this position, and which is of complete ignorance and entitlement to me, I think. I don't know what you guys think.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. If I can jump in it again, that is essentially how America was created, just to grab something from somebody else and now claiming it's yours, but also not really helping out, the people who really belong to indigenous people, and, not giving them what they actually had first, so that's completely true.
Yeah, and I grew up in Europe, where they don't even consider we don't have the right to appropriate, like, blatantly. It's just something that appalls me now that I've traveled and left there. It's just fantastic to see sometimes when you're like, you just can't do that. Sorry. You just can't.
Yes. Thank you so much for all the insight. I mean, I think we have had meaning behind our clothing for so long, since the beginning of time. And then when we're suddenly told that it's illegal to wear the clothing that we have or something like that, and then it's appropriated, that is just one of the most frustrating things. But today, we have a chance to use fashion as a form of self-expression. So I wonder what insights you have for younger people as they're becoming more informed about these things, and how they navigate their own form of self-expression, and what you would consider your form of self-expression in activism.
Well, not anymore because we're in lockdown. I used to teach kids photography. There's this one anecdote that it's very demonstrative to me that I want to throw out there, so people are like, oh, okay. They were meant to do, long story short, they were meant to do mood boards on a theme for a shoot, and these kids chose futurism. And their references were all these skinny girls in silver dresses and short, and they're like, yeah, we want silver and light, and so I was like, this is great, guys, but you're actually using the idea of futurism that these men in the 90s decided futurism was. And I told them that they had to rethink it and really think what futurism is for them, because what happens a lot with kids, it happened to me because we're not informed yet, is that we receive and we can't really tell what we're receiving, which is what is it that we're receiving that is good for me and which is authentic and what's not. So I would tell kids to almost not really look at what's going on or what has been done before, or just really, really, really investigate what's inside of them, because it's really easy for them to perpetuate something knowing. So as an image maker, I just want kids to like navigate their roots, their families, their experiences, because there's always beauty in that. And eventually people will see it too. But it's hard as kids to believe that, I think.
That's really beautiful, Camila. I love that so much. I you know, and this is a different aspect of it, but I think that like so much of self-expression comes from knowing who you are. And if we don't know who we are, then oftentimes we're, you know, I think we're like doing the accidental expressing ourselves with the lens of like someone pushing that upon us. So I think that in terms of like, for me personally, I think so much of the digging deep into who I am comes from discerning how I feel and how I choose to express myself through clothes or through whatever that day comes to listening to myself, you know? So I think that's been like, if I could give that advice to anyone, is to just like listen to yourself. You know, I think oftentimes we have the instinct to just be ourselves, and we allow so many voices to drown that out, you know? And I think that that is oftentimes a work that we don't realize has to happen constantly. And I think even digging deep into your own roots is such a big part of that. So that would be my advice.
To follow up on what Sam said, I mean, I recently wrote a story on how society has taught Black and Latinx women to only see ourselves through our bodies, and how hypersexualization starts very young for us, and how I had to unlearn in my adulthood that my body as it naturally appears is fine. It's not overly sexy, it's not underly sexy, it's just my body and it's great. And I think that when I was able to finally have that reckoning, I've noticed that my fashion choices changed. I wasn't trying to hide my body so much, but I was really wearing clothes that I felt beautiful in, that I felt empowered by, that I wasn't thinking, you know, how are my friends at brunch going to perceive this outfit, or how is someone at church going to look at it? I was just owning my space. And so, similar to what Sam says, I think really understanding that you are unique, you are powerful, and you bring something to the table that nobody else does. There's nothing inherently about you that is good or evil, right or wrong, that you are a person who's going to transform and grow and learn over time, I think is the biggest advice I would give. And just to understand your own power. You know, I said it earlier, but everyone is an activist. You might not think it, but you're an activist in your own way and in your own right. Trust yourself, trust your voice, and lend yourself to those conversations that matter to you. And you will be very surprised to see who you impact and who you inspire to also do the same.
Yeah, that's really, really beautiful. Just jumping off of everybody, you know, I think that self-expression through fashion is the first thing that obviously people see you when they look at you. But, you know, for me personally, growing up, I grew up in mostly Catholic schools. So we had to basically hide all of our self-expression. If we did have a self-expression, we were punished for it. So, you know, coming up from that background, I felt like just trying to break out, and just had so many insecurities as a young person, and trying to figure out what my voice was. And as soon as I realized, like, I can trust myself and I can be confident in who I am as a person, and not have to worry about like what other people think I should be or what I should be like, then that's when you really come into your own and really starting to find your own voice. And I think that as a young person, that is so difficult to do in these trying times, and in the social media of shaming or bullying or anything like that. It's very hard to do. But, you know, I think that having I think I lost you for a second. I think that making sure that you realize that you have so much power in your own voice, you have value, and that you're enough for yourself, and really truly loving yourself, that's when you can really, you know, flourish and like go for it, and really ensure that using your self-expression to just make sure that the world knows where you stand and who you are as a person. And I think that's so, it's so beautiful to see young people doing that right now, especially with, going to the marches and being really vocal about, sustainability and eco-friendly and, requiring all these things. I think it's really inspiring to see all these young people, because I definitely was not doing that at that age.
Yeah, I agree. I think us being able to have control over our own image is so important, especially as women or femme identifying people of color. We're often sexualized, like Jamae said, or considered exotic, which is another word that I absolutely hate. But at the same time, women of color are often targeted through like the white male gaze often, or the male gaze. So I wonder, specifically Kristen and Selva Negra, as designers of women's clothing, how do you reconcile living in a world where women are constantly faced with the threat of sexual violence and at times being targeted because of something that they are wearing?
Oh, yeah, that's that it's a really, oh man, it really breaks my heart to really see and hear, and just even going through that as a young woman and Latinx or Latina woman. I think that like Sam always says about Selva Negra, our clothing is kind of like the resistance to wearing super tight and very showy clothing. So when we're having photo shoots and styling everything together, and even just designing, it really is an expression and resistance to what women, Latin women, are expected to wear, or how we're perceived, or how we should be presenting ourselves. So, and we've always had just like that type of styling of things that are oversized, or things that can have that self-expression and sexy in our own way, where we're seeing ourselves as sexy and not other men having that male gaze or anything like that. And having the confidence to really shut that down, and when it does happen, and going into your own, and not trying not to be fazed by things like that, but in a sense, like just owning yourself, So I think that what we're trying to do with our clothing and how we portray these images is to show our resistance to that.
Yeah, this is such a good question, because I think the male gaze is something I've struggled with. I think maybe we all have for, since I was a child, like an actual child. And so I think it's, though, for us, like for Selva Negra, even though our resistance is to not necessarily be like super body conscious or whatever, that should not be confused with, if you are a woman who chooses to identify or express yourself in that way, that should not, pushing the narrative that, oh, well, she was wearing what she wore, and that she's asking for it, is absolutely problematic and wrong, and I think that brings us to the part where, like, I think the education side of this conversation is super important, because number one, we're not talked about, we don't talk about sex in our society. It's such a taboo. We don't talk to men about it. We don't talk to women about it. We don't know anything about ourselves. And so if we're ignoring these conversations about consent, about permission, about, reconfiguring how people think about how women choose to express themselves, I think is such an important part of this conversation. And it needs to be happening from like childhood, and I think it's a really important issue. And I think the reason why it persists is because it's just, again, not talked about. It's passed down. We already live in a misogynistic society. So in order to like break down the barriers of these conversations, it has to start with education, and being informed, for sure.
Oh, Camila, did you have something?
Oh, I have so much.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's the male gaze has really fucked us over. Sorry, because we've had to reset our minds to find what is our sexuality, our vision of beauty, our vision of yourself, without that gaze. But that doesn't mean that we don't have to have our sexuality or our beauty. It doesn't mean erasing it in order for us to speak. It means, and in image making again, defining, I've realized I've had my own issues with like, how do I express sexuality in my photos that aren't for the male gaze? And even if they're not for, obviously they're never for it, but they are catering to it. I don't want to produce images that satisfy that. I just want to produce images that satisfy the person's dignity, and to be them, for them to be like, you know, aware of themselves, but that doesn't mean that it's for anybody else. And it's such a work to learn how to discern, because also, and we should speak about this, is that we are in an internet world, putting things out there, and when content is overtly sexual, it gets more attention immediately. And how do you, as a young creative, discern from, is this good, or is this just getting popularity because I'm showing a tit, or because I'm, so I know I've had to do a really big work to understand this internet world where our work falls into, and know to discern whether I'm doing this to get this attention that feeds my ego, or if I'm doing it for the right reason. So it's like really complicated when you're like, there's so much input. So I just want to tell the people watching and the kids we were speaking to earlier too, that they think about the internet, that they learn how to use it, that they find themselves in it, and to like learn not to feed that ego from it, because it has to do with the male gaze a lot, because that is the content that automatically always gets more attention. So you just have to learn how to discern and like find your voice in it, you know, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I completely agree. Representation, having control over our own representation is so important, and doing it for each other and for ourselves too. But there's still a lot of steps that obviously need to be taken within the industry. So Jamea, I was wondering from you, obviously I believe that Black women need more equitable representation in the fashion industry. So I wanted to know from you how your work is illuminating that, and what steps you think the industry needs to take at this time to change that.
Wow. Whew, golden question. So let's start with the easier stuff. So the Blonde Misfit does that by having our digital website, theblondemisfit.com, shameless plug, where we curate the best of what's happening in culture, right? And so we have affiliate and aggregated RSS feeds that circle to you. So we're a one-stop shop for all things Black culture that you would want to read about. And the reason why I do that is because it's very important for me not only to tell our stories, but also to empower other writers who are also doing the same. And so we do a wonderful spotlight showcasing that storytelling on the website. We also have a newsletter that does the same. And it's really great because we have a slot in our newsletter that every week is geared for a Black or Latinx fashion or beauty brand as a spotlight. And it's really great because people get to learn about new brands and not hear the same 3 or 4 repeated. We have the podcast where I interview Black creatives in the fashion and beauty industry, and really kind of allow people to learn about their stories, what makes them a misfit, but also how they got to where they got to. Because I do feel that one of the biggest blockers for us is lack of resources, which usually equates to money, but then also lack of resources as in no one is just giving you the blueprint of here's how to be successful. And the reality is that doesn't exist in white spaces. They are willing to help and bring people in. And even if you're not fully 100% prepared for the role, they'll push you into it and groom you to lift up. And so I try to practice that in our communities as well, so that we can continue to create this cycle, so that we can build generational wealth, so that we can be a resource to our community, so that we can empower the next Black owned and Latinx owned and Asian owned brands that are growing, so that we can create more indigenous storytelling. Because even now, it's crazy to me how that's still just completely left out of media, but that's a whole different story, Renee. And so that is what we do. It's just, everything is just inherently about uplifting and a positive portrayal, and showing people that it is possible to do, and that it is possible to create space for yourself. And really, that if media is not going to give you the opportunity, that you can create your own table, and you can pull up your own seat, and you can have your own conversations until people notice you. So how the industry can get better is, again, I really do believe it's about a reckoning of understanding where you went wrong, but more importantly, what will you do in this moment now? There are very few creative directors of big fashion houses that are women, which goes back to this conversation we're having around dressing for the male gaze. And, it's like, I would want more women to be a part of that conversation of what we want to wear and how we feel sexy. There's very few Black creative directors, and they answer to somebody who answers to somebody that answers to somebody. There are very few Latinx designers who have their own autonomy. And I think that it's really about taking these established brands that are already doing well, that are already operating in a level of success, and pairing them with the up and coming designers, up and coming brands, these up and coming communities, and figuring out, how do we close that provider gap in between, so that you don't have to struggle the same way I struggled. When I talk to young journalists nowadays, I tell them everything that I did wrong in my early 20s, because I don't want you to make the same mistakes. I want you to make mistakes, because that's the only way you grow. But if I can save you a little bit of heartache along the way, why not do that? And so I do think that there has to be kind of a coming of togetherness in the fashion industry, where people can put their pride aside. They can figure out, how do we create this bigger conversation? How do we create this bigger table where more voices are welcome? And how do we enforce that? How do we ensure that the gatekeepers don't all look the same? They don't all come from the same socioeconomic background. They're not all the same sample size, that they're not all from the same walks of life. How do we really make sure that we are talking about inclusion from literally every avenue that we can explore? And for me, I personally think that begins with, again, ensuring that you have more, bi-POC people in your rooms, in your boardrooms, hiring in leadership positions. Also, my son is just doing a whole lot of stuff, so you guys are just gonna have to mind it.
I love the sunshine. It's beautiful. You know what? I'm just so honored to be here with you guys today. I think this conversation is incredible. And I think that conversations like this is really kind of just setting the stage for what the future of fashion is going to look like. And these conversations are so important. And I really appreciate everybody's honesty in this conversation, because honesty is what's going to change things. And that's just how it's going to be. So thank you so much, all of you, for coming, and everybody who has attended and listened to us. And you can find everybody's social media follows online, and they were also in the captions. Give everybody a follow today. And then I just want to thank everybody for joining. This is a part of It's on Us and Rape on Campus Summit Series, empowering student leaders to change the culture of campus sexual assault. This is only week 2, and more content is coming this week on Thursday. So thank you to the Summit Series website. And the full schedule of events you can view there. So thank you, everybody, for joining, and thank you to all the panelists. And I will follow you all on Instagram. Bye.